Millionaire sees ex-fiancée answer a call in Italian, not knowing she was speaking to his hidden son. Before we dive into this incredible story of second chances and unexpected reunions, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. This tale will touch your heart in ways you never imagined. Enjoy the story. The Manhattan skyline glittered like scattered diamonds as James Reynolds stepped out of his black sedan, 6 years of absence weighing heavy on his shoulders. At 38, the billionaire CEO of Reynolds Tech Solutions had conquered markets across Japan. But tonight, returning to the city that once held his heart felt like stepping into a ghost story. Le Bernardin's golden ambiance wrapped around him as he settled into his reserved corner table. The restaurant hadn't changed, still the epitome of New York elegance where power lunches turned into empire-building conversations. James loosened his Italian silk tie, allowing himself a rare moment of relaxation. Then he heard it. A voice speaking rapid melodic Italian drifted from across the dining room. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. That voice? God, that voice could still make his pulse quicken after all these years. Sì, capisco perfettamente. Domani alle 3. James's head turned slowly, and there she was, Sofia Ricci. His breath caught in his throat like a teenager seeing his first crush. She was more beautiful than his memories had preserved. Her dark, hair cascading in waves over shoulders wrapped in an elegant black dress that spoke of quiet sophistication, rather than the designer label she once wore. Time seemed suspended as their eyes met across the crowded restaurant. Sofia's phone conversation stopped mid-sentence. The color drained from her face as recognition dawned, replaced immediately by something James couldn't quite read. Surprise, anger, maybe fear. She ended her call abruptly, her fingers trembling, slightly as she set down the phone. James stood without thinking, his legs carrying him across the restaurant floor as if pulled by invisible strings. 6 years of carefully constructed walls crumbled with each step. Sofia. Her name escaped his lips like a prayer he'd forgotten how to say. James. Her voice was steady, controlled, but he caught the slight catch in her breath. I heard you. We're back in town. The air between them crackled with unspoken history, love letters never sent, apologies never given, a life together that had slipped away like sand through desperate fingers. You look, he began, then stopped. Beautiful seemed inadequate. Radiant felt presumptuous. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Italian words flashed across the screen and panic flickered in her eyes. I have to take this, she said, standing quickly. Too quickly. It was. Unexpected seeing you, James. She gathered her purse with practiced efficiency, leaving him standing, there with 1,000 questions and the lingering scent of her perfume. The same one she'd worn the night he'd walked away from everything they'd built together. As she disappeared into the Manhattan night, James felt the familiar ache of loss, sharper now than it had been in years. The morning sun cast long shadows across Central Park as James found himself walking the same paths he'd once shared with Sofia. He couldn't shake the image of her rushed departure, the panic in her eyes when her phone rang. Something was different about her, something he couldn't quite grasp. His answer came sooner than expected. There, by the playground near Bethesda, Fountain, stood Sofia in casual jeans and a cream sweater, looking more relaxed than she had the night before. But she wasn't alone. A young boy sat on the swing beside her, his dark hair catching the sunlight as he laughed at something she'd said. James's breath stopped cold. The child couldn't be more than 5 or 6, with features that sent a chill down James's spine. The same strong jawline, the same intelligent eyes, the same way of tilting his head when concentrating. Mamma, posso andare sullo scivolo? The boy asked in perfect Italian. Of course, sweetheart. But stay where I can see. You, Sofia replied, switching effortlessly to English. James stepped closer, his heart hammering against his ribs. The boy ran toward the slide with boundless energy. And when he turned to wave at his mother, James saw his own childhood face staring back at him. Sofia. His voice came out as barely a whisper. She spun around, her face going white as she saw him standing there. For a moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the playground, children laughing, parents chatting, faded into background noise. "We need to talk," James said, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. An hour later, they sat across from each other in a small cafe on the Upper West Side. The boy, Marco, she'd said his name was Marco, happily, coloring at a nearby table with crayons the waitress had provided. "He's mine, isn't he?" James asked, though he already knew the answer. Sophia's hands trembled around her coffee cup. "James, how old is he?" 6. He turned 6 last month. The math hit him like a physical blow. 6 years ago, right around the time he'd left for Japan, chasing his empire and abandoning everything else. "I tried to reach you," Sophia said, her voice barely audible. "When I found out I was pregnant, I called your office, your apartment, even your mother. But you'd changed everything. Your assistant said you were unreachable, that all communications should go through corporate lawyers." James closed his eyes, remembering his deliberate isolation. He'd wanted a clean break, no ties to pull him back from his ambitious plans. "I tried for months, James. I even showed up at your old building, but the doorman said you'd moved and left no forwarding address." "Mama?" Marco appeared beside their table, holding up his artwork, a colorful drawing of 3 stick figures, holding hands under a rainbow. "It's beautiful, Tesoro," Sophia said, kissing the top of his head. Marco looked at James with curious eyes. "Are you my mama's friend?" James looked into those familiar eyes, his own eyes, and felt his world shift completely. "Yes," he whispered. "I'm hoping to be." The modest Brooklyn apartment was a stark contrast to James's Manhattan penthouse. But as he stood outside Sophia's door with carefully chosen gifts, a complex Lego architecture set, and a bilingual picture book, his hands shook more than they ever had during billion-dollar negotiations. "He doesn't know," Sophia said quietly as she opened the door. "I told him you're an old friend who wants to meet him." The apartment was small but warm, filled with Marco's artwork on the refrigerator and Italian phrases written on colorful sticky notes throughout the living room. Sophia's way of keeping their heritage alive. "Ciao," Marco said shyly from behind, his mother's legs peeking out at this tall stranger who seemed to make his mama nervous. "Hello, Marco," James said, kneeling to the boy's level. "I brought you something." Marco's eyes widened at the Lego set, the Sydney Opera House challenging even for adults. "This is really hard," he said, examining the box. "I thought you might like a challenge," James replied. "Your mama tells me you're very smart." For the next 2 hours, James watched in amazement as Marco methodically sorted pieces by color and size, reading the instructions with the focus of an engineer. The boy chattered easily once his initial shyness wore off, switching between English and Italian mid-sentence without realizing it. "Mama, can you help with this part?" Marco asked, holding up a complex section. James watched Sophia kneel beside their son, her hands gentle as she guided him. The domestic scene felt both foreign and achingly familiar, a life he'd never known. He wanted until it was standing right in front of him. "You're really good at this," James observed as Marco perfectly aligned a difficult joint. "I like building things," Marco replied proudly. "Someday I want to build a house for me and Mama, a big one with a garden." "That sounds wonderful," James said, his throat tight. As the evening wound down, Marco had completed nearly a quarter of the intricate model. "Will you come back tomorrow?" he asked James, his small hand resting on the unfinished project. James looked at Sophia, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "If you'd like me to," James said. Marco grinned, the same lopsided smile James had seen in his own childhood photos, and held out his hand for a high five. The simple gesture felt like the most important business deal James had ever closed. "Buonanotte," Marco called as James reached the door. "Buonanotte, Marco," James replied, surprising both mother and son with his pronunciation. As he walked to his car, James realized that for the first time in 6 years, he was already planning tomorrow around someone else's schedule. The feeling should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like coming home. The elementary school auditorium buzzed with nervous energy as parents filled folding chairs, cameras ready to capture their children's theatrical debut. James adjusted his tie, feeling more anxious than he had during his first IPO presentation. Somewhere behind those makeshift curtains was his son, a thought that still sent electricity through his veins. "You came," Sophia said, settling into the seat beside him. Her surprise was evident, tinged with cautious hope. "I wouldn't miss it," James replied, and meant it completely. When the curtains parted, James scanned the stage until he found Marco, dressed as a wise owl in a forest fable. The boy had only 3 lines, but when his moment came, his clear voice carried across the room with confidence that reminded James of himself at corporate presentations. But it was what happened next that stopped James's heart. Marco's eyes searched the audience until they found James's face. The boy's entire expression lit up, and he gave the smallest wave. Just for him, James felt tears he hadn't shed in decades prick at his eyes. After the performance, they walked to Serendipity for ice cream, Marco still wearing his owl costume, wings with pride. "I saw you in the audience," Marco announced, attacking his chocolate sundae. "That made me not scared anymore." "You were perfect up there," James said. "A natural performer. Mama says acting helps with my English," Marco explained. "Sometimes I think in Italian first, then translate in my head." "That's incredible," James said genuinely. "Speaking 2 languages fluently is a gift. I've been trying to learn Japanese for business, but it's much harder as an adult." Marco's interest sparked. "Japanese has 3 different writing systems. I learned that in my culture class. Do you know any?" James pulled out his phone, showing Marco some basic characters. The boy studied them with the same intense focus he'd shown with the Lego set. "Numbers are universal, though," James continued. "Math is like a language everyone can speak." "I love math," Marco exclaimed. "Want to see a trick?" For the next 10 minutes, Marco demonstrated mental calculations that would challenge most teenagers, his joy infectious as he shared rapid-fire multiplication and division problems. "Where did you learn to do that?" James asked, genuinely impressed. "YouTube and library books," Marco said casually. "Mama says I have a mathematical mind." James caught Sophia's eye over Marco's head. She was watching their interaction with an expression he couldn't quite read. Wonder, perhaps, mixed with something that looked like recognition. "My papa was good at math, too," Marco said suddenly, then seemed to realize what he'd said. His face fell slightly. "I mean, Mama told me he was smart like that." The innocent words hit James like a physical blow. Here was his son, longing for a father who had been absent, while James had been building an empire he suddenly couldn't remember caring about. "I bet he would be very proud of you," James managed, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. Marco smiled, chocolate still smeared on his cheek, completely unaware that he was sitting across from the father who was already prouder than words could express. The mahogany conference table at Reynolds Tech gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights as James faced 12 of Japan's most influential investors. 6 years of careful relationship building had led to this moment, a partnership worth $800 million that would cement his company's dominance in the Asian market. "Reynolds-san," Mr. Takeshi spoke in measured English. "Our projections show unprecedented growth potential with this merger." James nodded, but his mind kept drifting to Marco's proud smile at the ice cream parlor, the way his son's eyes had lit up discussing mathematical concepts that most adults couldn't grasp. His phone buzzed silently on the table. A text from Sophia. "Marco's competing in the state math championship next Saturday. He keeps asking if you'll be there." The Japanese investors continued their presentation, charts and graphs filling the wall-mounted screens. Numbers that once would have captivated James now seemed hollow compared to his son's excited chatter about mental multiplication. "The timeline requires final signatures by Friday," Mr. Takeshi continued, "with immediate implementation beginning Saturday." Saturday, the day of Marco's competition. James's throat tightened. His COO, Patricia, shot him a concerned look as he remained silent longer than usual. "Gentlemen," James said finally, stunning, "everyone at the table, I need to request a postponement until Monday." The room fell silent. In 6 years of business with James Reynolds, no one had ever heard him delay anything for personal reasons. Reynolds-san? Mr. Takeshi's eyebrows rose. Is there a problem with our proposal? Not at all, James said, his voice growing stronger with each word. Your proposal is excellent. However, I have a prior commitment this Saturday that cannot be moved. Patricia looked as if she might faint. The Japanese delegation exchanged rapid words in their native language. This is unexpected, Mr. Takeshi said carefully. Our board flies back to Tokyo Sunday evening. Then we'll sign Sunday morning, James replied without hesitation. I apologize for any inconvenience, but Saturday is not negotiable. After the investors filed out, their displeasure evident despite their polite bows, Patricia cornered James in his office. What the hell just happened in there? She demanded. You've been planning this deal for 3 years. James looked out his floor-to-ceiling windows at the Manhattan skyline, the same view that had once represented everything he'd worked for. I have a son, Patricia. She blinked, clearly thinking she'd misheard. I'm sorry. What? A 6-year-old boy named Marco. He's competing in a math championship on Saturday, and I promised I'd be there. Patricia sank into the leather chair across from his desk. James, in the 15 years I've worked for you, you've never mentioned. I just found out about him, James said quietly. 3 days ago. He spent the next hour explaining everything. Sophia, the missed connection, the years of absence. He could never reclaim. Patricia listened with growing amazement. My God, James, she said finally. No wonder you've seemed different lately. That evening, James called Marco personally. I'll be there Saturday, he promised, hearing the boy's delighted squeal through the phone. As he hung up, James realized he'd just chosen his son over $800 million. It felt like the smartest business decision he'd ever made. The Saturday morning sun streamed through the windows of PS 321 as parents and children gathered for the regional math championship. Marco sat at a small desk, pencil in hand, wearing his lucky blue shirt and the confidence of a boy whose father had promised to be there. James's phone had been ringing since 5 a.m. The Tokyo deal is falling apart. Patricia's voice crackled through, his Bluetooth as he sat in traffic still 20 minutes from the school. Mr. Takeshi is threatening to pull out entirely. They're saying your unprofessional conduct shows a lack of commitment. Handle it, James said, pressing harder on the accelerator. But as he pulled into the school parking lot, his phone exploded with calls. The Japanese investors were leaving for the airport. 3 years of negotiations crumbling in real time. James, you need to get to the office now, Patricia urged. We might be able to salvage this with a video conference, but only if you're here in the next hour. Through the school windows, James could see Marco at his desk, occasionally glancing toward the door, waiting for a familiar face that had promised to appear. I'm at my son's competition, James said firmly. Your son will understand, Patricia pressed. This is $800 million, James. The company's future. Give me 30 minutes, James found himself saying. If I can fix this remotely, I will. He walked into the school auditorium just as the competition began. Marco's face lit up like Christmas morning when he spotted James in the back row. The boy waved enthusiastically, then turned to his test with renewed focus. But James's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Text after text, call after call. The Japanese delegation was at JFK. The deal was dying. I have to step outside for just a minute, James whispered to Sophia, who was recording Marco with her phone. James, don't, she started, but he was already walking toward the exit. In the hallway, James spent 45 minutes on a frantic conference call, trying to salvage years of work. When he finally returned to the auditorium, the competition was over. Parents were collecting their children, certificates were being distributed. Marco stood beside Sophia, holding a third-place ribbon, his earlier excitement replaced by disappointment. Where were you? The boy asked simply. I kept looking for you, but you were gone. I'm sorry, buddy. I had an emergency. You promised, Marco said, his voice small but cutting straight through James's heart. Sophia's expression was worse. then anger. It was resignation. "This is exactly why I didn't tell you about him sooner," she said quietly as Marco gathered his things. "I knew you'd do this." "Sophia, please let me explain." "No need," she said, taking Marco's hand. "I've heard all your explanations before. Some things never change." As they walked away, James heard Marco ask, "Will he come to my school concert next week?" "I don't think so, tesoro," Sophia replied gently. James stood alone in the emptying auditorium, his phone still buzzing with updates about the collapsed deal. He'd lost $800 million and gained nothing. Worse, he'd lost his son's trust in a single morning. The Reynolds Tech boardroom had never seen anything like it. James stood at the head of the polished table, facing 12 bewildered board members, his usual composed demeanor replaced by something they'd never witnessed, raw determination fueled by regret. "Ladies and gentlemen," James began, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of emotion, "I'm announcing a complete restructuring of our corporate philosophy." Board member Harold Whitman adjusted his glasses skeptically. "James, if this is about the failed Tokyo deal." "This isn't about Tokyo," James interrupted. "This is about building a company that values human connections as much as profit margins." He clicked a remote, and the wall screen filled with architectural renderings that had been rushed to completion over the weekend. "I'm proposing the Reynolds Family Innovation Campus," he continued. "A revolutionary workplace that includes on-site childcare, family housing units, flexible scheduling that prioritizes personal commitments, and unlimited family leave policies." The silence in the room was deafening. "Have you lost your mind?" Margaret Chen, the CFO, finally asked. "The overhead costs alone would be offset by reduced turnover, increased productivity, and employee loyalty," James finished. "I've run the numbers. Happy employees with stable family lives are 60% more productive than stressed, overworked ones." "What brought this on?" Harold demanded. 3 weeks ago, you were ready to sacrifice anything for the Tokyo expansion." James took a breath that seemed to come from his soul. "I discovered I have a 6-year-old son. Last Saturday, I chose a business call over his math competition. I watched the disappointment in his eyes and realized I've built an empire on a foundation of broken promises." The board exchanged glances that ranged from concern to outright alarm. "James," Margaret said carefully, "we understand you're going through a personal situation, but this isn't a personal crisis," James said firmly. "This is a business evolution. We're going to become the first major tech company to prove that family values and corporate success aren't mutually exclusive." He advanced to the next slide, a timeline for implementation. Phase 1 begins immediately. All employees receive 20 additional family days per year. Phase 2. We break ground on the new campus within 6 months. Phase 3. We become the model that every forward-thinking company in America copies. "The shareholders will revolt," Harold warned. "The shareholders will thank us when they see our retention rates and productivity scores," James countered. "I'm also announcing my personal investment of $200 million to fund the initial construction." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. "Furthermore," James continued, "I'm relocating my primary residence to Brooklyn to be closer to my son. The penthouse will be converted into executive guest housing for out-of-town employees' families." As the meeting ended in chaos, some board members excited, others horrified, James felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the certainty that he was finally making decisions he could be proud of. That evening, he called Sophia. "I know, I have no right to ask," he said, "but I need you to know that everything is changing. I'm changing." Her voice was cautious but not cold. "Marco asked about you today." "What did he say?" "He wanted to know if you were still his friend." James closed his eyes. "What did you tell him?" "That I hope so." It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't goodbye either. It was a beginning. The quarterly board presentation was in full swing, with James outlining the revolutionary family-first policies to a room full of skeptical investors when his phone vibrated. Against the mahogany table, he'd made a rule: No interruptions during board meetings, but Sophia's name on the screen made his blood freeze. "Excuse me for one moment," he said, stepping away from the presentation mid-sentence. "James?" Sophia's voice was shaking, barely controlled panic threading through each word. "Marco can't breathe. We're in an ambulance heading to Brooklyn Methodist. His asthma. It's never been this bad." The PowerPoint slides, the concerned murmurs of board members, the $250 million budget projections, everything faded to white noise. "I'm on my way," James said, already grabbing his jacket. "James, where are you going?" Harold called out as James headed for the door. "We're in the middle of—" "My son is in the hospital," James said without turning around. "Patricia will handle the rest." The elevator couldn't move fast enough. 20 floors felt like 20 miles as James's mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Marco's sweet voice asking about math problems, his proud smile after the school play, his disappointed face at the competition, all of it could be gone. Brooklyn Methodist's emergency room was a blur of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. James spotted Sophia immediately, pacing near the reception desk, her face streaked with tears. "How is he?" James asked, reaching for her hands without thinking. "They won't tell me anything yet," she said, her voice breaking. He couldn't catch his breath. "I've never seen him so scared, James. He kept saying he couldn't breathe and I—" "Hey," James said softly, pulling her into his arms as she finally broke down. "He's strong. He's going to be okay." They sat together in uncomfortable plastic chairs for what felt like hours. James's phone buzzed constantly. Patricia texting updates about the furious board members, missed investor calls, angry emails about his abrupt departure. But he didn't even glance at the screen. Mr. and Mrs. Ricci? A doctor in green scrubs approached them. We're not married," Sophia said quickly. "This is Marco's father." The doctor nodded professionally. "Marco is stable now. It was a severe asthma attack triggered by environmental factors, possibly stress combined with seasonal allergens. We've got him on breathing treatments, and he's responding well." "Can we see him?" James asked. "Of course. He's been asking for both of you." Marco looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, an oxygen mask covering half his face. But his eyes brightened when he saw them enter. "Papa," he said weakly, the Italian word slipping out naturally. "You came." James felt his heart stop and restart. Marco had never called him that before. "Of course I came, buddy," James said, taking the small hand in his. "I'll always come when you need me." "Promise?" Marco asked, his voice muffled by the mask. "Promise," James said, and meant it more than any contract he'd ever signed. As Marco drifted off to sleep, Sophia looked at James with something new in her eyes. Not quite trust, but the beginning of belief. "Your board meeting," she started. "There will be other board meetings," James said simply. "There's only one Marco." Outside in the hallway, his phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 unread messages. For the first time in his career, James Reynolds didn't care. Marco's recovery was swift, but the 3 days in the hospital had shifted something fundamental between James and his newfound family. As they prepared to take Marco home, Sophia's phone rang with a familiar Italian melody. "Mama?" Sophia answered, her face immediately tensing. She spoke rapidly in Italian, her voice rising with each exchange. Finally, she hung up and turned to James with an expression of barely concealed dread. "My parents are flying in from Rome," she said. "They'll be here tomorrow." James felt his stomach drop. "Do they know about me?" "They know Marco's father has reappeared," Sophia said carefully. "They're not exactly thrilled." The next afternoon, James stood in Sophia's small apartment, his hands sweating more than they had during his first $1 million pitch. The knock on the door came precisely at 2 o'clock, Italian punctuality at its finest. "Nonna, nonno," Marco squealed, launching himself into the arms of 2 elegantly dressed older adults who looked like they'd stepped from a European fashion magazine. Giovanni Ricci was a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that could cut glass. His wife, Isabella, was petite but formidable, her disapproval radiating from every perfectly postured inch. "Così questo è l'uomo che ha spezzato il cuore di nostra figlia," Giovanni said coldly in Italian, looking directly at James. Papa, Sofia warned. What did he say? Marco asked innocently. He said he's happy to meet your father. Sofia lied, smoothly. Isabella's sharp eyes missed nothing as she surveyed James from head to toe. So she said in accented but perfect English, you are the businessman who was too important to know about his own son. Nonna, Marco interrupted, tugging on his grandmother's elegant coat. Guess what? Papa came to the hospital when I was sick. He stayed all night. The word papa hit the room like a thunderbolt. Giovanni and Isabella exchanged a rapid conversation in Italian, their voices rising. Marco calls you papa? Isabella asked, her tone dangerous. It just happened, James said quietly. At the hospital. Bene, Giovanni said sarcastically. 1 week and now you are papa. Where were you when Sofia worked 2 jobs to pay for daycare? When she cried herself to sleep wondering how to afford Marco's school supplies? No, Marco said, sensing the tension. Papa is building a special place for kids at his work. He told me about it, and he's teaching me about business. Marco, Tesoro, why don't you show your grandparents your Lego project? Sofia suggested, desperate to defuse the situation. As Marco led his grandparents to his room, chattering in rapid Italian about his architectural creations, Isabella turned back to James. That boy, she said, her voice softening slightly, is the light of our lives. When Sofia came home pregnant and heartbroken, we thought our hearts would break too. We watched her struggle, watched her sacrifice everything for that child. I didn't know, James began. Adesso lo sai, Giovanni interrupted. Now you know. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? From Marco's room came the sound of delighted laughter as he demonstrated his bilingual skills, seamlessly switching between languages while explaining his elaborate building projects. I'm going to be the father he deserves, James said, his voice steady despite the weight of 4 pairs of Italian eyes judging his every word. We will see, Isabella said simply. Children are not business deals, Mr. Reynolds. They cannot be acquired and managed. They must be loved. As the afternoon wore on, James watched Marco effortlessly bridge the language gap, translating his grandparents' stories and jokes, his face glowing with the joy of having his entire family in one room. For the first time, James understood that gaining his son meant joining something much bigger than he'd ever imagined. The architectural firm's conference room buzzed with excitement as James unveiled plans that would revolutionize corporate America. Spread across the mahogany table were blueprints for a campus that looked more like a small city than a traditional office complex. The Reynolds Family Innovation Campus, James announced to Sofia, who sat studying the detailed drawings with amazement. 60 acres in Westchester, designed around the principle that great employees need great lives. Marco knelt on his chair, tracing his finger along the illustrated pathways. Is that a playground? He asked, pointing to a colorful section near the main building. Not just a playground, James smiled. A complete childcare center with certified teachers, plus an elementary school for employees' children. Look here. He pointed to another section. Family housing units, so employees never have to choose between career advancement and staying close to home. Sofia's expression shifted from skeptical to intrigued as she examined the plans more closely. This section here, what's this? Cultural centers, James explained. Language immersion programs, international employee support services. I was hoping, he paused, suddenly uncertain. I was hoping you might consider consulting on the Italian language program. You want me to work for you? Sofia's eyebrows rose. With me, James corrected. This campus is about creating space for whole families to thrive. Who better to design those programs than someone who successfully raised a bilingual child? While building her own career? Marco looked up from the blueprints, his eyes bright with curiosity. Can I help build it? Actually, James said, pulling out a smaller set of drawings, I was hoping you'd help me with something else. I'm trying to learn Italian, but I need a good teacher. I can teach you, Marco exclaimed. I taught Tommy at school how to count to 10 in Italian. That evening, in Sophia's living room, Marco became Professor Marco, armed with homemade flashcards and the patience of a saint. He sat cross-legged on the floor while James, the billionaire CEO, struggled with basic pronunciation. "No, no, Papa," Marco giggled. "It's come stay, not come stay. You have to make the words sing, like Mama. Does come stay?" James repeated, his accent terrible but his effort genuine. "Better," Marco clapped. "Now say ti voglio bene. That means, I love you for family." James's throat tightened as he repeated the phrase, watching his son's face light up with pride at his father's progress. "Anch'io ti voglio bene, Papa," Marco said softly, then translated, "I love you too, Dad." Sophia, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway, felt tears prick her eyes. This wasn't the same man who had walked away 6 years ago. This was someone new, someone willing to be taught by a 6-year-old, someone who measured success by his son's smile, rather than stock prices. "The campus is beautiful, James," she said later after Marco had gone to bed. "But implementing something this ambitious, the logistics alone would be staggering." "I know," James admitted. "It might fail spectacularly. But what if it doesn't? What if we create something that proves families and careers don't have to be enemies? And if the board fires you for this radical experiment?" James looked at the crude Italian flashcards Marco had made for him, stick figures labeled with Italian words in a 6-year-old's careful handwriting. "Then I'll have learned the most important lesson of my life from the best teacher I've ever had," he said. "Some things are worth the risk." Outside, snow began to fall on Brooklyn, and inside, a family that had been broken was slowly learning how to build something new together. The conference call from Tokyo came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, jerking James from his first peaceful sleep in weeks. Mr. Takeshi's voice carried across the ocean with the finality of a judge's gavel. "Reynolds-san, after careful consideration, Yamamoto Industries is withdrawing from all partnership discussions. Your recent emotional decision-making suggests a lack of the focus required for international business." James sat on the edge of his bed, watching the sunrise paint Brooklyn in golden hues through his new apartment window. A modest 2-bedroom he'd chosen for its proximity to Marco's school rather than prestige. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Takeshi," James replied calmly. "I wish you success in your future endeavors." After hanging up, James stared at his phone. In the old days, losing an $800 million deal would have sent him into crisis mode. Today, all he could think about was Marco's Italian lesson scheduled for after school. The ripple effects came swiftly. By noon, financial blogs were running headlines. Reynolds Tech in free fall. CEO's midlife crisis costs shareholders millions. By afternoon, 3 board members had requested an emergency meeting. "James, we need to talk." Harold Whitman's voice was grave as he entered the executive office with Margaret Chen and 2 other senior board members. "The whispers are getting louder. Some investors are questioning your leadership." "Based on what?" James asked, genuinely curious rather than defensive. "Based on you walking out of crucial meetings, spending company funds on utopian campus fantasies and choosing personal matters over billion-dollar deals," Margaret said bluntly. "I see." James leaned back in his chair. "And what do our employee satisfaction surveys say?" Margaret looked confused. "I'm sorry? Employee satisfaction, retention rates, productivity metrics. What do those numbers tell us?" "Well, they're actually at an all-time high since you announced the family-friendly policies," Harold admitted reluctantly. "But James, that doesn't offset. 3 companies have already reached out asking to model our new workplace initiatives," James continued. "Harvard Business School wants to do a case study, but you're right, I've lost focus." The board members exchanged worried glances. "I've lost focus on what doesn't matter," James clarified. "Harold, when was the last time you had dinner with your family on a weeknight?" "That's not relevant." "Margaret, when did you last attend your daughter's soccer game?" "James, where is this going?" "It's going toward the realization that we've built a company culture that demands people sacrifice their humanity for profit margins. And I'm done with that." His phone buzzed with a text from Marco. "Ciao, Papa. Ready for today's lesson? I have new words for you." James smiled, the warmth in his chest spreading as he typed back. Ciao, Marco. Can't wait. See you at 4. Gentlemen, lady, James said, standing up. I have an Italian lesson with my son in 20 minutes. This meeting is over. James, Harold called as he headed for the door. The board is considering a vote of no confidence. James paused at the threshold. Then I guess you'll have to decide what kind of company you want Reynolds Tech to be. The kind that builds empires, or the kind that builds lives. As he walked toward the elevator, his phone rang with another concerned investor. For the first time in his career, James Reynolds let it go to voicemail. He had more important things to do. The notification arrived on James's phone at exactly 9:47 a.m. Board meeting, vote of confidence, Thursday, 7 p.m., executive conference. Room, attendance mandatory. Below it, another message from Sophia. Marco's first piano recital, Thursday, 7 p.m., school auditorium. He's so excited you'll be there. James stared at the two texts, his coffee growing cold as the weight of the moment settled over him. 6 months ago, there wouldn't have been a choice. The board meeting would have taken precedence over everything. Patricia, he called his COO into his office. I need you to handle Thursday's board meeting. She nearly dropped her tablet. James, it's a vote of no confidence. Your entire career hangs in the balance. You can't delegate your own survival. Marco is performing a bilingual piece he composed himself, James said simply. Italian verses, English chorus. He's been practicing for weeks. James, please think about this rationally. I am thinking rationally, he interrupted. For the first time in my adult life, I'm making a decision based on what actually matters. Thursday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for October. As James adjusted his tie in the school parking lot, his phone erupted with calls from board members. Where the hell are you? Harold's voice cracked through the speaker. The meeting starts in 10 minutes. I'm exactly where I need to be, James replied, walking through the elementary school's front doors. The small auditorium was packed with proud parents, holding cameras and flowers. James found Sophia saving him a seat in the third row, her expression unreadable. You came, she said softly. I promised. When Marco appeared on stage in his crisp white shirt and clip-on tie, James felt his breath catch. The boy looked so small behind the upright piano. But when his fingers touched the keys, magic filled the room. The melody began softly, Marco's clear voice singing in Italian about family and love and finding your way home. Then the chorus shifted to English. Home is where the heart learns to be brave, where promises are kept and love is saved. James felt tears streaming down his face as he realized his 6-year-old son had written a song about him, about them, about second chances and the courage it takes to choose love over fear. When Marco finished, the applause was thunderous, but the boy's eyes searched only for one face. When he spotted James, Marco's smile could have powered the entire building. After the recital, as other families filtered out, Marco ran straight into James's arms. Did you like it, Papa? I wrote it myself. It was the most beautiful song I've ever heard, James said, holding his son tight. The words just came to me, Marco said proudly. Like when you told me about finding what matters most. James's phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Board voted 7-5 to retain you as CEO. Harold said your unwavering principles impressed them more than your presence. Would have. Congratulations, boss. But James barely glanced at the message. He was too busy listening to Marco explain every note of his composition, too busy memorizing the proud joy on his son's face, too busy falling deeper in love with the life he'd almost missed. Some victories, he realized, were worth more than any corporate triumph. Some promises were worth more than any profit. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of James's penthouse as he stood surrounded by real estate appraisers, auction house representatives, and financial advisors. The Manhattan skyline stretched endlessly before him, a view that had once symbolized everything he'd achieved. Mr. Reynolds, the lead appraiser said, consulting his tablet, your penthouse is valued at $32 million. The car collection adds another $8 million, and the private jet brings us to $65 million total liquid assets. James nodded, his decision already made. sell it all. His financial advisor, Robert Chen, looked physically ill. James, you're talking about liquidating nearly your entire personal portfolio. The campus construction is already straining company resources. If this investment fails, then I'll have lost money on the most important project of my life, James said simply. I can live with that. The irony wasn't lost on him. 6 months ago, he'd built his identity around accumulating possessions that impressed others. Now he was systematically dismantling that facade to build something that mattered to the people he loved. His phone buzzed with a text from Marco. Papa, can we go look at the new house again after school? I want to measure my room for my desk, James smiled, remembering the modest 3-bedroom colonial in Park Slope he'd fallen in love with. Not for its marble countertops or prestige address, but because it was a 7-minute walk from Marco's school and had a backyard perfect for a swing set. Robert, James said, proceed with all sales. I want the funds transferred to the campus construction account by Friday. The financial news hit the media like a tsunami. Tech billionaire's spectacular fall. Reynolds liquidates fortune for fantasy campus, screamed the Wall Street Journal. CNBC ran a segment titled, When CEOs Lose Their Minds. But inside Reynolds Tech, something different was happening. Sarah Martinez from accounting stopped James in the hallway. Mr. Reynolds, she said, her voice thick with emotion, I just wanted to thank you. Because of the new childcare policies, I don't have to choose between my career and my daughter's pre-K program. You've changed our lives. Similar encounters happened daily. Tom Wilson from IT mentioned how the flexible scheduling allowed him to care for his aging father. Lisa Park from marketing talked about bringing her family to the corporate retreat for the first time. The Friday James closed on his new house, Marco insisted on being there for the final walkthrough. This room will be mine? Marco asked, standing. In the middle of the smaller second bedroom, his arms spread wide. All yours, buddy. We can paint it any color you want. Blue like the ocean, Marco decided immediately. And can we put my Lego table by the window so I can see the street? Absolutely. As they explored every corner of their new home, James felt something he'd never experienced in his luxury penthouse: peace. This wasn't just a house, it was the foundation for the life he wanted to build with his son. Papa, Marco said, tugging on James's sleeve, will Mama come have dinner here sometimes? I hope so, James said honestly. Would you like that? Yes. Then we could all be together like a real family. That evening, as James stood in his soon-to-be empty penthouse packing the last of his personal items, he found a photo he'd forgotten about, himself at Marco's age, standing proudly next to a science fair project, his own father's hand on his shoulder. His father had missed most of James's childhood, consumed by work and ambition, but James could see the love in that captured moment, the pride in his father's eyes, the connection they'd shared before career demands pulled them apart. James carefully placed the photo in his moving box. Some cycles were meant to be broken. Some legacies were meant to be rewritten. Outside his window, Manhattan glittered with infinite possibilities. But for the first time in his adult life, James Reynolds was looking forward instead of up. The bulldozers broke ground on a crisp November morning, their engines roaring to life as the Reynolds Family Innovation Campus began its transformation from architect's dream to concrete reality. James stood at the construction site's edge, hard, hat slightly askew, watching 60 acres of Westchester County become the stage for the most ambitious experiment of his career. Papa, look, Marco called out, pointing excitedly at the massive earth-moving equipment. That one's bigger than our whole apartment. James grinned, remembering his own childhood fascination with construction sites. Want to see the blueprints again? They spread the architectural plans across the hood of James's new, decidedly modest Honda CR-V, a far cry from his former collection of exotic sports cars. Marco traced his finger along the illustrated pathways, his mathematical mind already calculating distances and angles. The playground connects to the childcare center, Marco observed, and the childcare center connects to the elementary school. It's like one big circle. That's the idea, James said. Families shouldn't have to choose between work and being together. The first major crisis hit in December. The construction foreman, Pete Kowalski, approached James with the grim expression of a man bearing bad news. "Mr. Reynolds, we've got a problem. The soil composition is different than the geological survey indicated. We're looking at an additional $2 million in foundation work." James felt his stomach tighten. The campus was already consuming resources faster than projected, and the liquidation of his personal assets wouldn't cover cost overruns of this magnitude. "How long do we have to decide?" James asked. "By Monday, or we shut down until spring." That weekend, James sat at his new kitchen table, a simple oak piece from a local furniture store, surrounded by financial projections and architectural modifications. Marco sat beside him working on his homework, occasionally glancing at the complex spreadsheets with curious eyes. "Papa, why do you look worried?" Marco asked, setting down his pencil. "Sometimes grown-up projects cost more money than we expected," James explained simply. "Like when I wanted the expensive Lego set but we had to save up for it?" "Exactly like that." Marco considered this seriously. "But you said this campus will help lots of families, right?" "That's the hope." "Then it's worth saving up for," Marco concluded with 6-year-old logic that cut straight to the heart of the matter. Monday morning, James called an emergency board meeting. "I'm authorizing the use of company reserves to cover the foundation overruns," he announced. Harold Whitman looked apoplectic. "James, that's nearly 10% of our operating capital. If this project fails, then we'll rebuild," James said, firmly. "But we're not abandoning it." The construction resumed, and with it came unexpected support. When word spread about the campus's financial challenges, something remarkable happened. Reynolds' tech employees began volunteering their weekends to help with non-technical construction tasks. Sarah Martinez organized food trucks for the volunteer crews. Tom Wilson's teenage son created a social media campaign that drew architectural students from local colleges. Sophia joined the project officially in January, hired as Cultural Integration Director. Her first initiative was establishing language immersion programs that would serve both employee families and the broader community. "You know," she said one evening as they watched Marco help paint playground equipment under careful supervision, "6 months ago, I thought you were the same person who walked away. I was wrong." "I was that person," James replied honestly. "Marco changed me. You both did." "No," Sophia said softly. "You changed yourself. We just gave you a reason." By spring, the campus began taking recognizable shape. The main building rose, like a glass and steel testament to work-life integration, while the family housing units nestled among carefully preserved oak trees. The childcare center featured floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the space with natural light, and the elementary school boasted the most advanced STEM lab in the county. Marco became the unofficial campus mascot, greeting construction workers in both English and Italian, his enthusiasm infectious. When the playground equipment arrived, he appointed himself chief inspector, testing every slide and swing set with the seriousness of a quality control engineer. "This one's perfect for kids my age," he announced after thoroughly examining a climbing structure. "But you need something for the little kids, too." "Good point," James said, making notes on his tablet. "What do you suggest?" "Swings," Marco said immediately. "Everyone loves swings. And maybe some of those bouncy animals on springs? And definitely monkey bars, but not too high." As spring turned to summer, the campus neared completion. Local news crews began documenting the innovative workplace design. Harvard Business School confirmed their intention to make it a case study. 3 major corporations announced plans to visit and potentially replicate the model. But for James, the most meaningful moment came on a July evening when Marco ran through the nearly completed childcare center, his laughter echoing off the walls. "Papa," he called out, his voice filled with wonder. "You really built this? For families like us?" "We built it," James corrected. "All of us together." As they walked home through their Park Slope neighborhood, Marco's hands small and warm in his, James realized that the most successful project of his career wasn't measured in square footage or construction budgets. It was measured in the trust of a 6-year-old boy who now called him Papa without hesitation, and in the growing possibility that the woman walking beside them might someday be willing to call their arrangement something more than co-parenting. The campus was nearly complete, but the family it had helped create was just beginning. The September morning dawned crisp and golden, with the kind of perfect autumn light that photographers dream about. The Reynolds Family Innovation Campus stood completed against the Westchester landscape, its glass facades reflecting the changing leaves like a kaleidoscope of hope and possibility. James stood at the main entrance, adjusting his tie for the 10th time in 5 minutes. Today wasn't just the official campus opening. It was the culmination of the most transformative year of his life. Media crews from major networks were setting up equipment. Business leaders from across the country had flown in to witness what many were calling the future of corporate America, and Harvard Business School professors were already taking notes for their case study. But none of that mattered as much as the small hand that slipped into his. "Nervous, Papa?" Marco asked, looking impossibly mature in his navy blue suit, a miniature version of James's own outfit. "A little," James admitted. "Are you?" "Nope," Marco grinned, his confidence infectious. "I practiced my speech in both languages. Nonna Isabella helped me with the Italian pronunciation." The mention of Sophia's parents brought a warm smile to James's face. Giovanni and Isabella had arrived from Rome 3 days earlier. Their initial hostility toward him transformed into cautious approval, then genuine affection. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been earned through countless small moments, patient consistency, and the undeniable evidence that James had fundamentally changed. "There they are," Sophia said, approaching with her parents, in tow. Isabella wore an elegant burgundy dress that complemented her silver hair, while Giovanni looked distinguished in his tailored charcoal suit. But it was Sophia who took James's breath away, radiant in a flowing emerald dress that brought out her eyes, her dark hair swept into an elegant updo that revealed the graceful line of her neck. "Sei bellissimo, Marco," Isabella said, adjusting her grandson's tie with grandmother's precision. "Grazie, Nonna." "Did you see the playground?" "I helped design some of it." "We saw it yesterday," Giovanni said, his voice warm with pride. "Your suggestions were very intelligent, Nipotino." The ceremony began at 10 o'clock sharp. A small stage had been erected in the campus's central courtyard, surrounded by the various buildings that represented James's revolutionary vision. The main office complex with its flexible workspaces, the state-of-the-art childcare center, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and natural lighting, the elementary school with its multilingual programs, and the family housing units nestled among preserved oak trees. James took the podium first, looking out at an audience that included employees who had supported his vision, skeptical board members who had come to witness either triumph or spectacular failure, and journalists documenting what might become a new chapter in American business, philosophy. 6 months ago, James began, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. I stood in a hospital waiting room, holding the hand of a woman I had hurt deeply, watching our son fight to breathe. In that moment, I realized that everything I had built, every success I had achieved, meant nothing if it came at the cost of the people I loved. He paused, finding Sophia's eyes in the crowd. She smiled encouragingly, the same smile that had first captured his heart years ago. This campus represents more than innovative architecture or progressive workplace policies. It represents a fundamental belief that human beings don't have to choose between professional success and personal fulfillment. It represents the radical idea that companies can measure success not just in profit margins, but in the happiness and stability of the families they serve. The applause was polite but measured. These were business leaders, after all, still evaluating whether this experiment would prove financially viable. Then Marco stepped up to the podium, barely tall enough to see over it even with the wooden box provided for his feet. The crowd quieted, curious to hear from the youngest speaker of the day. "Ciao a tutti," Marco began confidently, his clear voice carrying across the courtyard. That means, "Hello everyone," in Italian. My nonna and nonno taught me that language is how we share our hearts with other people. Several audience members smiled at his natural charm. "Before I met my papa," Marco continued, switching seamlessly to English, "Mama and I were a family of 2. We were happy, but sometimes Mama was tired because she had to do everything by herself. Then Papa came back and he was different than Mama expected. James felt his throat tighten with emotion. At first I wasn't sure if he would stay, Marco said with the brutal honesty of childhood. Grown-ups sometimes make promises they don't keep. But my Papa kept showing up. He came to my school play and my math competition, and when I was sick in the hospital, he learned Italian so we could talk in my other language. He listened when I had ideas about this place. Marco gestured proudly at the campus around them. This campus isn't just about work, the 6-year-old continued, his confidence growing with each word. It's about families being together. It's about kids having safe places to play while their parents work. It's about speaking different languages and celebrating different cultures and making sure nobody has to choose between taking care of their family and doing their job. The audience was completely captivated now, hanging on every word from this articulate child who embodied everything the campus represented. My Papa says that love is something you do, not just something you feel, Marco concluded. This campus is love that you can walk around in. It's love made of bricks and glass and playgrounds and dreams. He paused, then added with a grin, "Oh, and now I'll cut the ribbon because I'm really good with scissors." The laughter that erupted was genuine and warm, the kind that comes from hearts opened by unexpected wisdom. As Marco carefully cut the ceremonial ribbon with oversized scissors, cameras flashed and the crowd applauded with enthusiasm that had been notably absent during the more formal speeches. After the ceremony, as guests toured the facilities and journalists conducted interviews, James found a quiet moment with his family in the childcare center's reading nook. Marco was curled up with a bilingual picture book, reading aloud to his grandparents in alternating languages, while Sophia sat nearby, her hand resting casually on James's arm. "You did it," she said softly. "You actually did it." "We did it," James corrected, the same response he'd given Marco months earlier. "All of us." Through the large windows they could see employees' children playing on the playground Marco had helped design, their laughter mixing with conversations in English, Spanish, Italian, and Mandarin as parents from the international workforce shared stories and formed connections. "James," Sophia said, her voice carrying a note of something he'd been hoping to hear for months, "when this settles down, when the media attention dies down and the campus becomes just our normal life, would you like to have dinner? Just the two of us?" James felt his heart skip in the same way it had during their first date a lifetime ago. "I would love that," he said simply. "Good," she smiled, then added with mock seriousness, "But you're buying. I know how much money you spent on this place." As the sun set over the Reynolds Family Innovation Campus, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, James realized that success had been redefined entirely. It wasn't measured in stock prices or market dominance anymore. It was measured in Marco's proud smile as he gave tours in 2 languages, in Isabella's grudging admission that maybe American men could learn to prioritize family, in Giovanni's nod of approval as he watched his grandson flourish. Most of all, it was measured in the second chance he'd been given, not just with Sophia and Marco, but with himself. The campus would undoubtedly become the model he'd envisioned, studied and replicated by forward-thinking companies around the world. But its greatest success was already achieved. It had brought a family together and proven that love, like architecture, was something you built one decision at a time. As they walked home through their Park Slope neighborhood, Marco between them, chattering excitedly about the day and his mixture of English and Italian, James Reynolds finally understood what his father had missed, what he himself had almost missed. The empire that mattered most wasn't built in boardrooms or measured in profit margins. It was built in moments like these, one promise kept at a time.